He believed marriage would be his perfect revenge. She accepted her fate without imagining what was coming. A secret from the past would turn everything into chaos. But when the truth came out, everyone was shocked. Before you dive into this story of betrayal, conspiracy, and unexpected love, get ready for a twist that changes everything. The night was especially cold that October of 2010. Emily Martin adjusted her coat over her nurse's uniform as she crossed Blossom Square, a shortcut she usually took after her shifts at St. Clair Hospital. The wind blew through the trees, making the leaves dance a somber ballet under the light of the old lampposts. That's when she heard it, a sound so soft it almost blended with the whisper of the wind, a cry. Emily stopped, trying to identify the source of that wail. Her years of experience as a nurse in the neonatal ward had sharpened her senses to recognize the characteristic cry of a newborn. Following the sound, she approached a concrete bench partially hidden by a flowering shrub. There, wrapped in a thin pink blanket, was a baby. A girl she immediately realized couldn't be more than a few days old. Emily's heart raced in her chest, while her hands trembled as she touched the child's delicate skin. "How could anyone?" she murmured to herself, unable to complete the question. With precise movements, the result of years caring for babies at the hospital, she quickly examined the little one. The temperature was low but still within safe limits. The breathing, although slightly accelerated, was regular. Emily didn't hesitate. She took off her own coat and wrapped the baby in it, cradling her close to her chest. The crying gradually diminished, transforming into small hiccups as the girl quieted in the nurse's arms. "Everything's all right, little one," whispered Emily. "You're safe now." In her apartment a few hours later, Emily watched the baby sleeping in the center of her bed, surrounded by pillows. She had fed the little one with formula she always kept at home for emergencies, a habit acquired after years of working with newborns. The next day she would take the child to Child Protective Services, as protocol mandated. But something inside her already knew that her life would never be the same again. As she admired the baby's serene little face, Emily felt an inexplicable connection, as if that encounter was not mere coincidence. At 35, single and dedicated to her career, she had never seriously considered motherhood. Now, looking at that small life that destiny had placed in her path, she realized that her plans were about to change drastically. The next morning, after a night practically wide awake, Emily prepared herself to face the bureaucracy she knew would come. She put on her best clothes, organized a bag with everything the baby might need, and before leaving, looked at herself in the entryway mirror. "You can do this," she said to her reflection, trying to gather courage. At Child Protective Services, Emily explained the situation to Counselor Megan Sanders, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes and an understanding expression. "I want to request temporary guardianship," Emily declared, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. Megan observed her for a few moments before responding. "You understand that this is a complex process. We'll have to search for the biological parents. There's a whole necessary investigation." "I understand perfectly," Emily interrupted, her determination growing with each moment. "I've been a neonatal nurse for 12 years. I have stable finances, my own apartment, and flexibility at work. I can offer a safe and loving home for this child." The counselor made several notes, requested documents, asked questions. Emily answered everything with clarity and honesty. By the end of the morning, after what seemed like endless hours, Megan finally smiled. "I'll recommend granting temporary guardianship," she announced. "But you need to be aware that this is just the beginning. The adoption process, if that's your desire, will be long and will demand a lot from you." Emily nodded, feeling a wave of relief and joy course through her body. She looked at the baby, who was sleeping peacefully in the carrier by her side. "What name do you plan to give her?" asked Megan. "Sophie," Emily responded without hesitation. "Sophie Martin." That same morning, miles away, in the luxurious office of one of the country's largest construction companies, Richard Morgan was signing another $1 million contract. At 40, he was one of the most successful businessmen in the construction industry, known for his coldness in business and relentless determination. As his pen glided over the paper, A framed photograph on the desk caught his attention. It was the only personal photo he kept there, him and Lisa, his ex-girlfriend, smiling on a beach almost 10 years ago. Lisa, who had disappeared without a trace, taking with her a secret that he would only discover years later. Richard pushed the thought away, as he always did when memories threatened to surface. He turned his attention back to the documents, not imagining that, at that exact moment, his life was about to change completely. Somewhere in the city, a nurse was cradling his daughter, a child whose existence he was still unaware of, but who was destined to turn his world upside down. The months that followed Sophie's arrival were an emotional roller coaster for Emily. Each day brought new challenges and joys that she had never imagined experiencing. The apartment, once a quiet refuge after long shifts, was now filled with laughter, cries, and the adorable mess that accompanies a baby. Emily completely reorganized her life. She reduced her hours at the hospital, prioritizing shifts that would allow her to spend more time with Sophie. Her guest room was transformed into a baby's room, painted in soft shades of yellow and green. Friends and colleagues, initially surprised by her sudden decision to become a mother, soon surrendered to little Sophie's charm, forming an invaluable support network. On a Saturday afternoon, while playing with Sophie on the living room floor, Emily received a visit from her best friend, Rachel. "I never thought I'd see you like this," commented Rachel, observing Emily making faces to make Sophie laugh. "You were always so focused on your career." Emily smiled without taking her eyes off her daughter. "I didn't imagine it either, but now I can't see myself any other way. It's as if Sophie was always destined to be part of my life." Rachel approached, sitting next to them on the floor. "And what about the adoption process? Any news?" Emily sighed, her smile faltering for a moment. "It's being more complicated than I expected. Child Protective Services still hasn't found any clue about Sophie's biological parents. That's good for my adoption request, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" Rachel encouraged. "Sometimes I think about her mother. Why did she abandon her? Is she okay? Does she regret it?" Emily confessed, her voice low so as not to disturb Sophie, who was now playing distractedly with a rattle. Rachel placed her hand on her friend's shoulder. "It's natural for you to have these thoughts, but remember, you're Sophie's mother now. You saved her. You're giving her all the love and care she needs." Emily nodded, grateful for the support. "You're right. I just hope the adoption process is completed soon. I can't imagine my life without her now." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Richard Morgan was facing his own challenges. His company was about to start an ambitious urban revitalization project, something that required all his attention and energy. However, even amid meetings and negotiations, he couldn't rid himself of a restlessness that had pursued him for months. In his office late at night, Richard found himself alone, looking out the panoramic window that offered a stunning view of the city. In his hands he held an envelope he had received weeks ago, but which he still hadn't had the courage to open completely. Finally, taking a sip of whiskey to strengthen himself, he removed the contents of the envelope. It was a letter from Lisa, his ex-girlfriend, sent by a lawyer. The letter had arrived almost 10 years after her disappearance, and the first lines he had read weeks ago had left him in shock. With slightly trembling hands, Richard began to read. "Richard, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. There's so much I need to tell you, things that should have been said a long time ago. When I left you 10 years ago, I was pregnant. Yes, you have a daughter." Richard stopped reading, unable to continue. A daughter. He had a daughter somewhere. The news, even after weeks, still left him dazed. Why had Lisa never told him? Where was this child now? Determined to discover the truth, Richard picked up the phone and dialed his private investigator's number. "Kevin, I need you to intensify the search. I don't care about the cost. Use all necessary resources. I need to find my daughter." Hanging up the phone, Richard turned his attention to the city below. Somewhere, among millions of people, was his daughter, a child he had never known, but who already occupied all his thoughts. "I will find you," he murmured to himself, a silent promise echoing in the empty office. That night, in different parts of the city, Emily and Richard faced their own internal battles. Emily struggling to secure her future with Sophie, and Richard determined to find the daughter he had just discovered. Their paths, still unknown to each other, were about to cross in ways that neither could predict. While the city slept, fate began to weave the threads that would unite these lives, setting the stage for revelations that would change everything. This second chapter deepens Emily's connection with Sophie and introduces Richard's internal conflict upon discovering his daughter. The narrative continues to develop, preparing the ground for future meetings and revelations. Time passed quickly, and before Emily realized it, Sophie was already turning 3. The girl was growing healthy and happy, filling the nurse's life with joy and purpose. The adoption process was advancing slowly, but Emily remained optimistic, confident that soon Sophie would legally be her daughter. On a sunny Saturday morning, Emily decided to take Sophie to Oak Tree Park, a popular spot among the city's families. The park was full of children running and laughing, enjoying the good weather. "Mommy, look at the swing," Sophie exclaimed, pulling Emily by the hand toward the playground. Emily smiled, letting herself be guided by her daughter. "Calm down, my love. The swing isn't going to run away." While pushing Sophie on the swing, Emily couldn't help but notice a man sitting on a nearby bench. He seemed out of place, wearing an expensive suit amid the casual clothes of the other parents. What caught her attention most, however, was the intense look he cast in their direction. On the other side of the playground, Richard Morgan observed the scene with a mix of emotions. After months of fruitless searching, his investigator had finally found a clue about his daughter's whereabouts. The information had led him to this park, where supposedly a child with the age and description of his daughter often played on Saturdays. His eyes scanned the location, analyzing each child, each family. It was then that his gaze fixed on a girl on the swing. Something about her, perhaps the smile, perhaps the sparkle in her eyes, painfully reminded him of Lisa. His heart raced. Could it be her? Emily, noticing the stranger's persistent gaze, began to feel uncomfortable. She decided it was time to leave. "Let's go, Sophie. How about we go get some ice cream?" she suggested, helping the girl get down from the swing. Seeing the two walking away, Richard panicked. He couldn't lose this opportunity. He stood up abruptly and began to follow them, trying to appear casual. Emily, in turn, felt increasingly alarmed. She tightened her grip on Sophie's hand and quickened her pace. When they were almost at the park exit, Richard finally gathered his courage and approached them. "Excuse me," he said, his voice trembling despite his usual composure. I need to talk to you." Emily turned, positioning herself protectively in front of Sophie. "Who are you? What do you want?" Richard hesitated, realizing how suspicious his approach seemed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to frighten you. My name is Richard Morgan. I'm looking for my daughter." Emily's blood ran cold. She had heard of Richard Morgan, the powerful construction businessman. What could he want with them? "I'm sorry, but I don't know you or your daughter," Emily responded firmly. "Please leave us alone." Richard, desperate, tried to explain. "You don't understand. I only recently discovered that I have a daughter. She should be this girl's age, and—" "Enough!" Emily interrupted him, her voice mixing fear and anger. "I don't know what you're talking about, but stay away from us." Picking Sophie up, Emily quickly moved away, leaving a stunned Richard behind. As they distanced themselves, Sophie innocently asked, "Mummy, who was that man?" "No one important, sweetheart," Emily answered, trying to keep calm. "Let's go home." That night, after putting Sophie to bed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the encounter in the park. What if that man really was Sophie's biological father? The idea terrified her. After 3 years raising Sophie as her daughter, the possibility of losing her was unbearable. Meanwhile, in his luxurious apartment, Richard couldn't get the image of that girl out of his head. He was convinced she was his daughter. The resemblance to Lisa was undeniable. But how to approach the situation without seeming like a lunatic or a danger? Determined, he picked up the phone and called his lawyer. "Mr. Wilson, I need your help. I think I've found my daughter, but the situation is complicated. I need you to find out everything you can about a nurse named Emily. She has a girl of about 3 years old." On the other side of the city, Emily was also making an important call. "Ms. Sanders, this is Emily Martin. Sorry to call so late, but something happened today that left me worried. I need to know how Sophie's adoption process is going. Is there any chance of someone appearing to claim custody of her?" As the night progressed, both Emily and Richard remained awake, their minds filled with concerns and plans. Fate had finally put their paths on a collision course, and the consequences of this encounter were about to change their lives forever. Sophie, oblivious to the whirlwind of emotions forming around her, slept peacefully, dreaming of swings and ice cream, not knowing that she was the center of a storm that was just beginning. In the weeks that followed the meeting in the park, both Emily and Richard immersed themselves in parallel investigations, each motivated by their own fears and hopes. Emily, determined to protect her relationship with Sophie, intensified her efforts to finalize the adoption process. She spent hours on the phone with Ms. Sanders, her lawyer, discussing strategies and possible obstacles. "Emily, I understand your concern," said Ms. Sanders during one of their long conversations. "But you need to understand that if the biological father really appears and proves paternity, he will have legal rights. But what about all the time I've spent with Sophie? The bonds we've created? Does that count for nothing?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with emotion. The lawyer sighed on the other end of the line. "It does count, yes. The courts take into consideration the welfare of the child. The fact that you've cared for Sophie since she was a baby is a strong point in your favor, but we can't ignore biological rights." Emily felt a knot form in her throat. The idea of losing Sophie was unbearable. "What can we do?" "For now, let's speed up the adoption process as much as possible. The more consolidated your legal position as Sophie's mother, the better our position will be if any challenge arises." Meanwhile, Richard spared no effort or resources in his own investigation. His lawyer, Mr. Wilson, had hired a team of private investigators to gather all possible information about Emily and Sophie. On a rainy afternoon, Richard received an urgent call from Mr. Wilson. "Mr. Morgan, we have important news. Can you come to my office immediately?" Richard didn't hesitate. In less than an hour, he was sitting before the lawyer, eager for news. Mr. Wilson opened a folder on the desk. "We've obtained detailed information about Emily Martin and the girl Sophie. Emily is a neonatal nurse at St. Clair Hospital for 15 years, single, no biological children. She found Sophie abandoned in a square just over 3 years ago." Richard leaned forward, absorbing every word. "And what about Sophie? Is there any proof that she's my daughter?" The lawyer hesitated for a moment. "We don't have definitive proof, Mr. Morgan. Sophie's estimated date of birth coincides with the period mentioned in Lisa's letter. Additionally, we managed to get a recent photo of the girl." He slid a photograph across the desk. Richard picked it up with trembling hands. In the image, Sophie smiled, her bright eyes and dark hair painfully reminiscent of Lisa's. "It's her," Richard murmured. His voice choked. "I'm sure." Mr. Wilson cleared his throat, drawing Richard's attention. "Mr. Morgan, I need to alert you. Emily is in the process of adopting Sophie. If we want to act, we need to do it soon." Richard stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth in the office. "What do you suggest we do?" "We can file a request for a DNA test and, simultaneously, a paternity recognition action. This would halt the adoption process until paternity is clarified." Richard stopped, looking out the window. The rain outside reflected the storm within him. On one hand, he longed to meet his daughter, to be part of her life. On the other, he feared the impact this action would have on the child. "And if I tried a less aggressive approach first?" Richard asked, turning to the lawyer. "Maybe I could talk to Emily, explain the situation." Mr. Wilson frowned. "That's risky. She could use that time to speed up the adoption or even disappear with the child." Richard shook his head. "No, I don't think she would do that. From what we've discovered, she really seems to love Sophie. I want to try dialogue before resorting to a legal battle." That same night, in her apartment, Emily was playing with Sophie in the living room. She observed each smile, each gesture of her daughter, feeling a mixture of deep love and overwhelming fear. "Mommy, why are you sad?" Sophie suddenly asked, her childish perception catching Emily's concern. Emily forced a smile. "I'm not sad, my love. Just thinking." "Thinking about what?" Emily pulled Sophie into a tight hug. "About how much I love you, my little one. About how lucky I am to have you." At that moment, the phone rang. Emily answered, still embracing Sophie. "Hello?" "Emily Martin." A male voice, familiar and at the same time terrifying, sounded from the other end. "This is Richard Morgan. We met in the park a few weeks ago. I really need to talk to you about Sophie." Emily's heart raced. She looked at Sophie, who was now playing distractedly with a doll, oblivious to the tension that was forming. "Mr. Morgan, I already told you I have nothing to talk to you about. Please," Richard's voice sounded almost pleading, "I just ask that you hear me out. I have reasons to believe that Sophie is my biological daughter. I don't want to cause problems. I just want the chance to explain, and maybe we can find a solution together." Emily felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her worst suspicions were being confirmed, but looking at Sophie, so innocent and trusting, she knew she needed to be strong. "All right," she finally responded, her voice firmer than she felt. "We can meet, but in a public place and with my lawyer present." As they arranged the details of the meeting, Emily knew she was about to enter the most important battle of her life. A battle for the love of a child who, biological or not, was her daughter in all the ways that mattered. On the other side of the city, Richard hung up the phone, a mixture of relief and apprehension taking hold of him. The first step had been taken. Now it remained to be seen where this path would lead them. The cafe chosen for the meeting was a neutral location, a small tea house in the city centre, known for its discretion and quiet ambiance. Emily arrived first, accompanied by her lawyer, Mrs. Anders. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the teacup, trying to calm herself before Richard's arrival. "Remember, Emily," Ms. Sanders spoke in a low voice, "don't admit anything. Listen to what he has to say, but don't make promises or agreements. I'm here to ensure that your rights and Sophie's are protected." Emily nodded, unable to form words. Her heart seemed to want to leap from her chest when she saw Richard enter the cafe. He was alone, which surprised her a bit. Richard approached the table, his face a mask of nervousness and determination. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," he said, sitting down. "This is my lawyer, Ms. Sanders," Emily introduced, her voice firmer than she felt. Richard greeted the lawyer with a nod before turning his attention to Emily. "I know this situation is difficult for all of us. I believe it's best we get straight to the point." He took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and placed it on the table. "This is a letter I received from Lisa, my ex-girlfriend, a few months ago. In it, she reveals that she was pregnant when she left me, almost 4 years ago." Emily felt a chill in her stomach. 4 years ago, Sophie's exact age. Richard continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know why she never told me." In the letter, she explains that she was sick and wanted to ensure that our daughter would be cared for if something happened to her. Apparently, she planned to leave the baby in a safe place where she would be found and well cared for. Emily struggled to maintain her composure. The story perfectly coincided with the circumstances in which she had found Sophie. "Mr. Morgan," Ms. Sanders intervened, "I understand this is an emotionally charged situation, but I need to remind you that a letter is not legal proof of paternity." Richard nodded. "I know, that's why I'm here. I don't want to start a legal battle. I want to meet my daughter, to be part of her life. But I also understand the bond that you, Emily, have with Sophie. I don't want to destroy that." Emily finally found her voice. "How can I be sure that you're really her father? How do I know this isn't some scheme to take Sophie away from me?" The pain in Richard's eyes was palpable. "I understand your distrust. I'm willing to take a DNA test to prove paternity, but Emily, look into my eyes. Do you really think I would invent something like this?" For a moment, the cafe seemed to disappear around them. Emily looked deeply into Richard's eyes, searching for any sign of falsehood. What she saw was only pain, hope, and a longing she recognized, a father's love for his daughter. "What exactly do you want?" Emily asked, her voice almost a whisper. Richard took a deep breath. "I want to meet Sophie. I want the chance to be her father, but I don't want to take you out of her life. You're the mother she knows, the mother who raised her. I'm proposing that we find a way to make this work, for Sophie's sake." Miss Sanders intervened again. "Mr. Morgan, I appreciate your conciliatory approach, but I must warn you that legally the situation is complex. Emily is in the process of adopting Sophie." "I know," Richard replied. "That's why I came to speak directly with Emily first. I believe that if we work together, we can find a solution that's good for everyone, especially Sophie." Emily felt her head spinning. Part of her wanted to scream, deny everything, take Sophie and run far away. But another part, the part that always put Sophie's needs first, knew she couldn't deny the girl the chance to know her biological father. I need time to think," Emily finally said. "This is too much to process at once." Richard nodded, understanding. "Of course, take all the time you need. I just ask that you don't shut me out completely. Sophie is my daughter too, and I want to be part of her life." When the meeting ended, Emily left the cafe feeling as if she had just gotten off an emotional roller coaster. Miss Sanders accompanied her to her car. "Emily, I know this is difficult, but we need to be strategic. If he really is the biological father and decides to fight for custody, things can get complicated." Emily looked at her lawyer, tears in her eyes. "What should I do?" Ms. Sanders sighed. "For now, don't make any hasty decisions. Let's investigate his story more thoroughly. And Emily, seriously consider the cooperation proposal. Sometimes a friendly agreement is better than a prolonged legal battle." That night, after putting Sophie to bed, Emily sat in the living room, looking at the photos of her daughter scattered on the walls. Each smile, each captured moment was a reminder of the love they shared. But now there was a shadow over that love, an uncertainty that threatened everything she had built. "What should I do?" she whispered to the silence of the night, knowing that the decision she made would change not only her life, but also Sophie's future forever. The days that followed the meeting at the cafe were torture for Emily. Each moment with Sophie was now tinged with a mixture of deep love and paralyzing fear. She observed each gesture, each smile of her daughter, trying to memorize everything, as if fearing that these moments might be the last. A week after the meeting, Emily finally made a decision. After long conversations with Miss Sanders and sleepless nights reflecting on the situation, she knew she could no longer postpone the inevitable. With trembling hands, she dialed the number Richard had given her. "Hello, Richard. It's Emily. I think we need to talk again. About Sophie." From the other end of the line, Richard felt his heart quicken. "Of course, Emily. When and where do you want to meet?" They arranged to meet at the same cafe, this time without lawyers. Emily wanted a frank conversation, from parent to parent, about Sophie's future. On the day of the meeting, Emily arrived first, her stomach in knots. When Richard entered, she immediately noticed how nervous he looked, almost vulnerable. "Thank you for calling me," Richard said, sitting down. "I was worried that you might, disappear with Sophie." Emily stared at him, surprised by his frankness. "I thought about it," she admitted, "but I realized it wouldn't be fair to Sophie. She deserves to know the truth about her origins." Richard nodded, visibly relieved. "So, what have you decided?" Emily took a deep breath. "I want to do the DNA test," she said, observing Richard's reaction. "If you really are Sophie's father, I think we need to find a way for you to be part of her life." The relief on Richard's face was palpable. "Emily, you don't know how much this means to me. I promise. I don't want to take Sophie away from you. I just want the chance to know her, to be her father." "But how would this work in practice?" Emily asked, concern evident in her voice. "Sophie only knows me as her mother. How do we explain this to a 4-year-old child?" Richard hesitated. I don't know exactly, but we can seek professional help. A child psychologist, perhaps? Someone who can guide us on the best way to introduce this change into her life. Emily agreed. The idea of seeking professional help reassured her a bit. And what about the legal issue? My adoption process? We can work on this together, Richard suggested. If the DNA test confirms that I'm the father, I can legally recognize paternity. That doesn't nullify your status as Sophie's mother. We can seek joint custody. The word joint made Emily shudder. The idea of sharing Sophie with someone was still difficult to accept. But she knew that if Richard really was the father, this would be the best solution for everyone, especially for Sophie. All right, Emily finally said. Let's do the DNA test. But I want to make one thing clear, Richard. Sophie is my #1 priority. If at any point I feel that this is harming her in any way, I'll do whatever is necessary to protect her. Richard solemnly nodded. I completely understand. Sophie is my priority too. I promise we'll do this in the smoothest way possible for her. In the days that followed, Emily and Richard worked together to arrange the DNA test. The process was discreet, conducted at a private clinic recommended by Richard's lawyer. The wait for the results was agonizing for both. Emily oscillated between the hope that the test would be negative and the fear of what would happen if it was positive. Richard, in turn, could barely sleep, anxious to have confirmation of what his heart already knew. Finally, 2 weeks later, the envelope with the results arrived. Emily and Richard decided to open it together, again at the cafe that had become their neutral meeting point. With trembling hands, Richard opened the envelope and read the contents. His face paled, and for a moment Emily feared he might faint. It's positive, he whispered, tears in his eyes. I am Sophie's father. Emily's world seemed to spin. Despite having prepared herself for this possibility, the reality of the fact hit her like a high-speed train. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely audible. Richard took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. Now we keep our promise. We find a way to make this work, for Sophie's sake. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Emily sat on the balcony of her apartment looking at the city lights. Her life had changed irrevocably. The future she had imagined for her and Sophie now included a third person, a father, who had appeared out of nowhere. Meanwhile, in his office, Richard looked at a photo of Sophie that Emily had agreed to share. His heart overflowed with love for this girl he barely knew, but who was undeniably his daughter. Both knew that the road ahead would be difficult. Explaining the situation to Sophie, navigating the legal and emotional challenges, learning to be an unconventional family, all of this awaited them. But that night, in different parts of the city, both Emily and Richard made the same silent promise. They would do whatever was necessary to ensure that Sophie grew up surrounded by love, understanding and support. The future was uncertain, but love for Sophie would be their compass on this unknown journey. The weeks following the confirmation of Richard's paternity were an emotional roller coaster for all involved. Emily and Richard, advised by their respective lawyers and by a child psychologist, Dr. Matthews, decided it was time to introduce Richard into Sophie's life. The plan was simple in theory, but emotionally complex in practice. They would begin by introducing Richard as a special friend of the family, allowing Sophie to gradually get used to his presence before revealing the truth about their relationship. The first meeting was set for a sunny Saturday at the park where Sophie loved to play. Emily arrived with the girl, her heart racing when she saw Richard already waiting for them near the playground. "Hello, Sophie," Richard said, kneeling to be at the girl's height. His voice trembled slightly with emotion. "I'm a friend of yours." "Moms, my name is Richard." Sophie, always sociable, smiled shyly. "Hi, Richard. Do you want to see me swing really high?" Richard looked at Emily, seeking approval. With a small nod, she agreed. "I'd love to see that, Sophie," he replied, his heart overflowing with love for this little one who, without knowing, was his daughter. The following hours were filled with laughter, play, and relaxed conversations. Emily watched closely, her heart divided between the joy of seeing Sophie happy and the fear of what the future held. At the end of the afternoon, when Sophie fell asleep in the car on the way home, Emily finally let the tears fall. It was the beginning of a new reality, one she had never imagined. In the months that followed, Richard became a constant presence in Sophie's life. Park outings, zoo visits, movie afternoons, little by little, he integrated into the girls' daily life. Emily, for her part, struggled with her own demons. Seeing the growing bond between Sophie and Richard awakened in her a confusing mixture of emotions. Joy for her daughter's happiness, fear of losing her special place in Sophie's life, and an unexpected twinge of something she was reluctant to admit, attraction to the man Richard was revealing himself to be. One night, after another day of family activities, Emily and Richard talked in low voices in the kitchen while Sophie slept. "I think it's time," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, "to tell her the truth." Richard nodded, his face a mixture of anxiety and determination. "You're right. Dr. Matthews said Sophie is ready, but what about you, Emily? Are you ready?" Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know if I'll ever be completely ready, but I know it's the right thing to do." Richard, on impulse, took Emily's hand. The touch sent an electric current through both, surprising them with its intensity. "We'll do this together," he said softly, "as a family." The day chosen for the big revelation came faster than either of them was prepared for. With Dr. Matthews's guidance, Emily and Richard sat Sophie between them on the living room sofa. "Sophie, sweetheart," Emily began, her voice trembling slightly. "Remember how we talked about how some families are different, how some children have two dads or two mums, or just one of each?" Sophie nodded, her large, curious eyes moving from Emily to Richard. Richard took a deep breath before speaking. "Sophie, I am your father, your biological father." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Sophie looked at Richard, then at Emily, her small forehead furrowed in confusion. But Mommy is my mommy," she finally said, her voice small and uncertain. "Yes, my love," Emily quickly replied, pulling Sophie close. "I will always be your mother. Nothing will change that. Richard, he's like an extra gift. Now you have a father who loves you very much too." Sophie remained quiet for a long moment, processing the information as best as a 4-year-old could. Then, to everyone's surprise, she turned to Richard with a shy smile. "Can I call you Daddy?" The tears Richard had been holding back finally fell. "Of course you can, my little one. I would love that." The hug that followed was awkward, emotional, and perfect in its own way. Emily, Richard, and Sophie united as an unconventional family, but one full of love. That night, after Sophie finally fell asleep, exhausted by the day's emotions, Emily and Richard sat on the balcony, each lost in their own thoughts. "Thank you," Richard finally said, breaking the silence, "for allowing me to be part of her life, of your lives." Emily looked at him, realizing for the first time how much Richard had changed since their first meeting. The cold and determined man had given way to a loving and dedicated father. "We still have a long way to go," she replied softly. Richard nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Yes, we do. But now we have something we didn't have before." "What?" Emily asked, curious. "A family," Richard answered simply. "Strange, complicated, but ours." As the night progressed, Emily and Richard remained on the balcony, talking quietly about the future, about Sophie, and about the possibilities that were opening up before them. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that neither could have predicted, but which now seemed somehow inevitable. The months that followed the revelation brought a series of adjustments and challenges for the newly formed family. Sophie, with the typical resilience of children, adapted surprisingly well to the new dynamic. For her, having a daddy was an exciting novelty, and she eagerly absorbed every moment with Richard. Emily, on the other hand, struggled with conflicting feelings. Seeing the growing bond between Sophie and Richard was both gratifying and painful. There were moments when she found herself observing the two playing or talking, a twinge of jealousy mixed with an unexpected wave of affection. One Sunday afternoon, while Sophie and Richard were building an elaborate sandcastle in the park, Emily sat on a nearby bench, lost in thought. "Is everything okay?" Rachel's voice, her best friend, brought her back to reality. Emily sighed. "Yes, no. I don't know. It's complicated." Rachel followed Emily's gaze to Richard and Sophie. "He seems to be doing well as a father." "Yes, he is," Emily admitted. "It's just that sometimes I feel like I'm losing my place in her life." Rachel placed her hand on her friend's shoulder. "Emily, you're her mother. Nothing will change that. Having Richard in her life doesn't diminish the love Sophie has for you." Emily nodded, trying to absorb the words of comfort. "I know. It's just difficult sometimes." "And what about you and Richard?" Rachel asked, a touch of curiosity in her voice. Emily felt her face heat up. "What about us?" Rachel smiled, knowing her friend too well. "Come on, Emily, I see how you look at him when you think no one is paying attention." "Don't be ridiculous," Emily protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Richard and we're just Sophie's parents." Rachel murmured, clearly unconvinced. The conversation was interrupted when Sophie came running, sand in her hair and a radiant smile on her face. Mommy, come see the castle that Daddy and I made." Emily allowed herself to be dragged to the sandbox, where Richard was putting the finishing touches on an impressive sandcastle. "Wow, it's amazing," Emily exclaimed, genuinely impressed. Richard looked at her, a shy smile on his face. "Thanks." Although the chief architect here was Sophie, for a moment their gazes met, and Emily felt that familiar electric current run through her body. She quickly looked away, focusing on Sophie. As the weeks passed, the family's routine began to establish itself. Richard spent most of his weekends with Sophie and Emily, and even during the week he frequently showed up for dinner or to put Sophie to bed. However, not everything was rosy. There were challenges, especially when it came time to discuss more formal custody arrangements. "I was thinking," Richard said one night after Sophie had gone to bed, "maybe we could consider having Sophie spend some days of the week with me." Emily felt her heart tighten. "You mean for her to sleep at your house?" Richard nodded cautiously. "Yes, not immediately, of course, but eventually. I want to be more than just a weekend dad." Emily struggled to maintain her composure. "I understand, Richard, but Sophie has never slept away from me. She's still so small." "I know," Richard said softly, "and I don't want to pressure, but I think we need to start thinking about it, for Sophie's sake." The conversation ended in a tense impasse, both aware that this was just the first of many challenges they would have to face. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Richard worked hard to find a balance. With the continued help of Dr. Matthews, they began to explore ways to expand Richard's time with Sophie, always prioritizing the girls' well-being. It was during this period that something unexpected began to happen. In the search for common ground, Emily and Richard began to truly know each other. Long conversations after Sophie went to bed, messages exchanged during the day, sharing funny moments or concerns. Little by little, a genuine friendship began to blossom. One night, after a particularly difficult discussion about custody arrangements, Richard surprised Emily. "You know," he said, a tired smile on his face, "despite all our disagreements, there's no one I would rather be sharing this journey with." Emily felt her heart skip a beat. "Even when I'm stubborn and difficult," Richard laughed softly. "Especially then. Your stubbornness comes from love for Sophie. How could I not admire that?" In that moment, something subtly changed between them. A look that lasted a bit longer, a casual touch that sent shivers through both. Emily found herself thinking about Richard in ways that went beyond his role as Sophie's father. However, both were cautious. Sophie's well-being was paramount, and neither wanted to further complicate the situation. But as the days passed, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the growing attraction between them. One Saturday night, after a day full of family activities, Sophie fell asleep on the sofa between Emily and Richard while they were watching a movie. Gently, Richard picked the girl up to take her to bed. When he returned to the living room, he found Emily tidying up the scattered toys. "Let me help," he offered, bending down to pick up some building blocks. Their fingers touched when they both reached for the same toy. The touch, though brief, sent a wave of electricity through both. They looked at each other, the tension in the air almost palpable. "Emily, Richard began, his voice hoarse. But before he could continue, the sound of Emily's phone broke the moment. It was the hospital, calling her for an emergency. "I need to go," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Can you stay with Sophie?" Richard nodded, unable to trust his own voice. As Emily hurriedly left, both knew that something had changed. The delicate balance they had built was about to be challenged in ways that neither could predict. The near moment between Emily and Richard that night opened the doors to a new layer of complexity in their relationship. In the days that followed, both seemed to dance around each other, aware of a growing tension that went beyond their connection as Sophie's parents. Emily found herself thinking about Richard at unexpected moments, at work, while shopping, even when she was putting Sophie to bed. She remembered his smile, the accidental touch of their hands, the way his eyes shone when he looked at Sophie. It was confusing and scary, but also exciting in a way she hadn't felt in years. Richard, in turn, struggled with his own conflicting feelings. He had entered this situation focused solely on getting to know his daughter, but now found himself inexplicably attracted to the woman who had raised Sophie with so much love and dedication. Emily's strength, her kindness, even her occasional stubbornness, all of this attracted him in a way he hadn't expected. One afternoon, while Sophie was at school, Emily and Richard met to discuss some practical details about the girls' routine. They chose a cafe near the hospital where Emily worked. "So," Richard began, nervously fidgeting with his coffee cup, "about the summer camp we mentioned." Emily nodded, trying to focus on the matter at hand, and not on the way the sunlight made Richard's eyes look even more intense. "Yes, I think it would be good for her. Sophie loves outdoor activities." "I agree," Richard said, a small smile playing on his lips. "She definitely inherited that from me. Lisa hated anything related to camping." The mention of Lisa, Sophie's biological mother, brought an unexpected twinge of jealousy to Emily. She mentally reprimanded herself for it. After all, what right did she have to feel jealous? Richard, noticing the subtle change in Emily's expression, quickly changed the subject. "Emily, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" she asked, surprised. "For everything," he replied, his intense gaze fixed on her. "For taking such good care of Sophie all these years, for giving me the chance to be part of her life, for being you." Emily felt her heart race. "Richard, At that moment, Emily's phone rang, breaking the moment. It was the hospital again, another emergency. "I'm sorry," she said, getting up hurriedly. "I have to go." Richard nodded, a mixture of disappointment and understanding on his face. "Of course I understand. I'll pick Sophie up from school today." Emily hesitated for a moment, then on impulse leaned in and gave a quick kiss on Richard's cheek. "Thank you," she murmured, before hurrying out. Richard sat there, lightly touching the spot where Emily's lips had touched his skin, a whirlwind of emotions in his chest. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Richard continued their careful dance around each other. There were prolonged looks, accidental touches, moments of almost palpable tension. But both were cautious, aware of the impact any change in their relationship could have on Sophie. It was during a park outing on a sunny Sunday that things finally came to a head. Sophie ran ahead, chasing soap bubbles that Richard was blowing, while Emily watched, laughing at her daughter's contagious joy. In a moment of distraction, Sophie tripped and fell. Before Emily could react, Richard was already there, picking up the girl and checking if she was hurt. "It's all okay, princess," he murmured softly, wiping the tears from Sophie's face. "Daddy's here." Emily observed the scene, a wave of emotion washing over her. Seeing Richard, this man who had entered their lives so abruptly, caring for Sophie with so much love and gentleness, was too much for her. When Sophie calmed down and went back to playing, Richard approached Emily. "She's fine," he said with a smile. "Just a little scare." Emily nodded, unable to speak. Unexpected tears began to form in her eyes. "Emily?" Richard asked, concerned. "What's wrong?" I don't know, she replied, her voice trembling. It's just that seeing you with her... Richard, what are we doing? Richard took a step forward, reducing the distance between them. What do you mean? Emily took a deep breath, gathering courage. This thing between us. We can't keep pretending it doesn't exist. Richard was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on hers. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and touched Emily's face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. You're right, he said softly. We can't ignore this anymore. The world seemed to disappear around them. Slowly, as if moved by a force beyond their control, they leaned toward each other. Their lips were inches apart when, Mommy, Daddy, look what I found. Sophie's excited voice brought them back to reality. They quickly separated, both blushing and avoiding each other's gaze. Sophie ran up to them, holding a colorful feather she had found. Isn't it beautiful? Emily forced a smile, trying to calm her racing heart. It's beautiful, sweetie. Why don't we keep it to put in your memory album? While Sophie chattered animatedly about her discovery, Emily and Richard exchanged looks laden with unexpressed emotion. Both knew they had crossed a line and there was no going back. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Emily and Richard sat on the balcony, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Emily, Richard finally spoke, his voice low and intense. We need to talk about what's happening between us. Emily nodded, her heart beating fast. I know, but Richard, what if this doesn't work out? And Sophie, we can't risk hurting her. Richard took Emily's hand, intertwining their fingers. I know it's risky, but Emily, what if it does work out? What if this is exactly what our family needs? Emily looked at their joined hands, a mixture of fear and hope in her chest. I don't know, Richard. I really don't know. As the night progressed, Emily and Richard remained on the balcony, talking quietly about their fears, hopes, and the uncertain future that was opening up before them. They knew that any decision they made would change their lives, and Sophie's forever. What they didn't know was that fate had even more surprises in store for them, and that their journey was far from over. The weeks that followed the conversation, on the balcony, were a whirlwind of emotions for Emily and Richard. Both were aware of the change in their relationship, but hesitant to take the next step. Sophie's well-being was always the priority, and the fear of complicating the situation even further kept them at an impasse. However, fate had other plans. On a Saturday morning, while Sophie was playing in her room, Emily was organizing some old boxes in the attic. Richard had offered to help, and together they were sifting through years of accumulated memories. What's this? Richard asked, holding a dusty box with the name Lisa handwritten on it. Emily froze. I had forgotten about that, she murmured, taking the box from Richard's hands. Carefully, she opened the box. Inside, there was a variety of items, old photos, letters, even a small diary. These were Lisa's belongings that had been found along with Sophie on that fateful night in the park. I never had the courage to look at this properly, Emily admitted. I always felt like I was invading someone's privacy. Richard nodded, understanding. I get it, but maybe now is the time. Together they began to examine the contents of the box. There were photos of Lisa pregnant, notes about baby, names, and even a letter addressed to Sophie, to be opened when she was older. But it was the diary that caught Richard's attention. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes widened. Emily, he said, his voice trembling, you need to see this. Emily leaned in to read what Richard was pointing to. It was an entry dated a few days before Sophie was found. I can't continue like this anymore. The doctor says the treatment isn't working. I don't want my daughter to grow up watching her mother wither away. Richard deserves to know his daughter, but I'm afraid of how he'll react. He's always been so focused on his career. I've made a decision. I'll leave our daughter where I know she'll be found and well cared for. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but I know it's best for her. I hope that someday both she and Richard can forgive me. Emily felt tears streaming down her face. She knew she was sick. She wanted Sophie to have a chance. Richard was in shock. She thought of me, wanted me to know Sophie. At that moment, They heard footsteps on the stairs. Sophie appeared at the entrance to the attic, her eyes curious. "Mommy, Daddy, what are you doing?" Emily and Richard exchanged glances. How to explain this to a 4-year-old child? Emily extended her arms to Sophie. "Come here, my love. Mommy and Daddy found some very special things about your other mommy." Sophie tilted her head, confused. "My other mommy?" Richard picked up one of Lisa's photos. "Yes, sweetheart. This is Lisa. She loved you very, very much." In the minutes that followed, Emily and Richard did their best to explain the situation to Sophie in a way that a child could understand. They talked about how Lisa was sick, but loved Sophie enough to ensure she would have a good life. Sophie looked at Lisa's photo for a long time. "She's pretty," she finally said. "Can I keep the photo?" Emily felt her heart tighten. "Of course you can, my love." That night after Sophie went to bed, Emily and Richard sat in the living room, emotionally exhausted. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Emily asked softly. Richard nodded. "Yes, but maybe for the better." He turned to Emily, taking her hands in his. "Emily, what we discovered today, it made me realize something." "What?" she asked, her heart racing. "That life is too short to be afraid." Lisa knew that. She made a difficult decision out of love for Sophie. Richard paused, gathering courage. "Emily, I love you. I love you and I love our daughter. I don't want to waste any more time being afraid of what could go wrong." Emily felt tears return to her eyes, but this time of joy. "Richard, I love you too. I've been trying to deny it, but I can't anymore." Slowly, as if time had slowed down, they leaned toward each other. Their lips met in a gentle kiss full of promise and hope. When they separated, both were smiling, despite the tears. "What do we do now?" Emily asked. Richard smiled. "Now, we build our family. Together." As the night progressed, Emily and Richard remained embraced on the sofa, talking about the future, about Sophie, and about the amazing journey that had brought them there. What they didn't know was that fate still had one last surprise in store for them. A surprise that would test their newly declared love and change the course of their lives once again. The months that followed the discovery of Lisa's belongings and the declaration of love between Emily and Richard were of profound transformation for the small family. Sophie, with the typical resilience of children, embraced the idea of having not only two parents who loved her, but also the memory of a biological mother who had made the ultimate sacrifice for her. Emily and Richard, in turn, carefully navigated the waters of their new relationship. They decided to take it slow, always prioritizing Sophie's well-being. The evenings were often filled with long and deep conversations about their past, present, and future together. It was during one of these conversations that Richard made a proposal that would change everything again. "Emily," he began, nervous, "I've been thinking, what if we moved, the three of us together?" Emily looked at him, surprised. "You mean, live together?" Richard nodded. "I know it might seem rushed, but think about it. Sophie would have both of us all the time. We wouldn't need this complicated logistics of coming and going. And we could really start our life as a family." Emily was silent for a moment, absorbing the idea. Part of her was excited at the prospect, but another part felt fear. "What if it doesn't work out?" she whispered. Richard took her hands. "Emily, we can't live in fear of what if. Look at how much we've already overcome together. I believe we can make this work." After much reflection and discussion, including conversations with Sophie and sessions with Dr. Matthews, they decided to take the step. They found a spacious house with a beautiful garden, perfect for a growing family. Moving day arrived, bringing with it a mixture of emotions. As they packed the last boxes in Emily's apartment, Sophie ran from one side to the other, excited at the prospect of her new room. "Mommy, can I take all my dolls?" Sophie asked, hugging a pile of toys. Emily smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "Of course you can, my love. We'll have plenty of space in the new house." Richard entered the room, carrying more boxes. "Hey, my favorite girls, ready for our new adventure?" Sophie ran to hug her father's legs. "Yes, I can't wait to see my new room." Emily observed the scene, her heart overflowing with love. Despite her initial fears, she knew they were doing the right thing. The first weeks in the new house were of adjustments and discoveries. There were moments of tension, of course, deciding where to put the furniture, establishing new routines, dealing with the small frictions of daily life. But there were also moments of pure joy: family dinners in the new dining room, movie nights cuddled on the sofa, weekends working together in the garden. It was during one of these weekends in the garden that the unexpected happened. Emily was planting flowers when suddenly she felt a strong dizziness. Her vision darkened for a moment and she staggered. Richard, who was nearby, ran to support her. "Emily, what happened?" Emily shook her head, trying to compose herself. "I don't know. Suddenly I felt dizzy. It must be the heat." But it wasn't the heat. In the days that followed, Emily continued to feel strange. Morning sickness, inexplicable fatigue, sudden mood changes. It was Sophie, innocently, who planted the seed of truth. "Mommy," she said one morning, while Emily struggled against a wave of nausea, "you're looking like Aunt Rachel when she had the baby in her tummy." Emily froze. It couldn't be, or could it? That afternoon, while Sophie was at school, Emily took a pregnancy test. The minutes of waiting seemed like an eternity. When she finally looked at the result, her world stopped for a moment. Positive. She was pregnant. The news hit her like a train. A baby. She and Richard were going to have a baby. How would Sophie react? They had barely established themselves as a family, and now this? When Richard arrived home that night, he found Emily sitting on the sofa, staring into space. "Emily, is everything okay?" he asked, concerned. She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Richard, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood still, processing the information. Then, slowly, a smile began to form on his face. "A baby," he whispered, incredulous. "We're going to have a baby." Emily nodded, still uncertain about how to feel. "Yes, but Richard, what about Sophie? It's a lot of change in such a short time. What if she feels left out? What if—" Richard knelt before her, taking her hands. "Emily, listen. I know it's scary, but think of this as one more gift that life has given us. Sophie will be an amazing big sister, and well, we've already proven that we can handle anything together, right?" Gradually, Emily's fear began to give way to excitement. A baby, a new life that she and Richard had created together. "How are we going to tell Sophie?" Emily asked. Richard smiled. "Together, like we do everything." That night, as they prepared to share the news with Sophie, Emily and Richard knew they were about to embark on another exciting journey. A journey that would test their love, their patience, and their strength as a family. What they didn't know was that the universe still had one last surprise in store for them. A surprise that would bring to light long-buried secrets and force them to confront the past in a way they never expected. The news of Emily's pregnancy was received by Sophie with a mixture of curiosity and excitement. The little girl was delighted with the idea of being a big sister, asking 1,000 questions about the baby and when she could play with it. As the months passed, Emily's belly grew, as did the love and unity of the family. Richard proved to be an attentive partner, always present at medical appointments and helping with preparations for the arrival of the new family member. It was during one of these appointments, in the 6th month of pregnancy, that fate decided to play its last card. "Mr. and Mrs. Martin Morgan," the doctor said, looking at the ultrasound monitor, "I have surprising news for you." Emily and Richard exchanged worried looks. "What is it, doctor?" Emily asked, anxious. The doctor smiled. "It's nothing serious, don't worry. In fact, it's a double blessing. You're expecting twins." The news fell like a bomb. Twins! Emily and Richard were shocked, but soon the surprise gave way to joy. 2 babies. Their family was about to grow even more. As they left the clinic, still processing the news, Richard received a call that would change everything again. "Hello, yes, it's me. What, but how? I understand, yes. We'll be there." Emily looked at him, concerned. "What happened?" Richard took a deep breath. "It was from the law office that handled Lisa's affairs. Apparently, she left a letter to be delivered to Sophie on her 18th birthday. But with all the confusion of the adoption and the search for paternity, the letter got lost. They found it now and want us to pick it up. Emily's heart raced. More revelations from Lisa. What would this mean for their family? They decided to pick up the letter together with Sophie. The girl, now almost 5 years old, was excited about the idea of receiving something from her other mommy. At the lawyer's office, Sophie sat between Emily and Richard as the envelope was opened. Emily read the letter aloud, her voice trembling, with emotion. "My dear Sophie, if you're reading this, it means you've grown to become a wonderful young woman. I deeply regret not being there to see this happen. I want you to know that leaving you was the hardest decision I've ever made, but it was done with all the love in the world. There's something you need to know. You have a twin sister. When I discovered I was sick and pregnant with twins, I made the difficult decision to separate you. I wanted to ensure that both of you had the chance for a full and happy life, even if I couldn't be there. Your sister was adopted by a loving family. Her name is Lily, and she was born just 5 minutes after you. I've included contact information in case you want to meet her someday. I hope you can understand and forgive my decision. Know that wherever I am, I'm watching over you with all the love in the world, with eternal love. Your mother, Lisa." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily and Richard looked at each other, astonished. Sophie, although not fully understanding, knew that something important had happened. "I have a sister?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with surprise. Emily hugged Sophie, tears in her eyes. "Yes, my love, it seems you have a twin sister." Richard, still processing the information, picked up the envelope with the contact information. "What do we do now?" he asked Emily. Emily looked at Sophie, then at her own belly where her twins were growing. She smiled despite the tears. "We do what we've always done. We face it together, as a family." In the months that followed, Emily, Richard and Sophie embarked on the journey of finding Lily. It was a process full of emotions, anxiety, fear, hope. When they finally made contact with Lily's adoptive family, they discovered that she lived just 2 cities away. The first meeting was emotional. Sophie and Lily, although raised separately, connected instantly. It was as if a lost part of each had been found. As they watched the twins playing together, Emily felt the babies in her belly move. She smiled at Richard, who hugged her lovingly. "Who would have thought," he whispered, "that when you found Sophie on that cold night, you were beginning a journey that would bring us here?" Emily nodded, emotional. "Our family isn't conventional, but it's full of love. Sophie, Lily, the twins on the way, for we are blessed, Richard." Months later, when the twins were born, a boy and a girl they named Lucas and Olivia, the family was complete. Sophie and Lily, now inseparable, were proud and protective older sisters. Life wasn't always easy. There were challenges, arguments, sleepless nights, but there was also laughter, hugs, moments of pure joy. Emily and Richard faced each obstacle. Together, their love strengthened by the trials they had overcome. On a quiet night, with the children finally sleeping, Emily and Richard sat on the porch of their house, looking at the stars. "Do you regret anything?" Richard asked softly. Emily smiled, snuggling against him. "Not for a second. Each decision, each challenge brought us here. Our family may not be conventional, but it's ours, and I wouldn't change anything." Richard kissed her forehead lovingly. "I love you, Emily. Thank you for giving me this family, this home." "I love you too, Richard," Emily replied. "Always." As the couple watched the night sky, reflecting on the incredible journey that had united them, they knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be a family. Love, acceptance, and the strength to overcome any challenge side by side. 2 years had passed since Emily and Richard built their family. Sophie, now 7 years old, was a child full of energy, with curious eyes and an easy smile. The twins, Lucas and Olivia, completed the chaotic but happy scene of the Martin Morgan home. Despite all the happiness, there was a shadow that occasionally returned to haunt Emily. It was impossible to forget the difficulties faced to secure Sophie in her life, the constant fear that something or someone could shake the stability they had achieved. It was on a cloudy afternoon, while organizing documents in the Home Office, that Emily found an unusual correspondence, a simple envelope without a return address, only her name handwritten. Upon opening it, she immediately recognized the handwriting of an old friend, Rachel. "Emily, I hope you're... Well, there's something I need to tell you, but I didn't have the courage to do it in person. It's about Lisa. I recently discovered that before she passed away, she left not only the letter that reached you, but also some bank records that perhaps you should see. I thought it better to alert you." Emily felt a chill down her spine. What records would these be? Why didn't Rachel want to speak before? Could there be something more about Lisa that they still didn't know? She kept the envelope, but couldn't ignore the presentiment growing inside her. That night, Emily decided to talk to Richard. After putting the twins to bed and checking on Sophie in her room, she sat with him on the balcony, as they did on quieter nights. "I received a letter today," she began, handing the envelope to him. Richard read in silence, his eyes becoming increasingly tense. "Rachel is trustworthy," he said after finishing. "If she thought it was important, we can't ignore it." "I thought the same," Emily agreed. "But what could it be? More secrets? We've already faced so much." Richard took her hand firmly. "No matter what it is, we face it together, remember." The next day they contacted Rachel, who invited them for a discreet coffee. She was visibly nervous when they arrived. "Emily, Richard, I know it may seem invasive, but when Lisa passed away, part of her estate was managed by a distant relative. I by chance knew this person and learned that some funds were transferred to an unidentified account. Recently, I discovered that this account belongs to someone who used false documents and who made transactions up until a year ago." "Are you saying that someone linked to Lisa might be hiding something even today?" Emily asked, surprised. "I don't know who it is," Rachel said, "but I thought you needed to know. Maybe it's something unimportant, maybe not." Emily and Richard exchanged serious looks. The peace they had achieved seemed once again threatened by ghosts from the past. Determined not to live under uncertainties, Richard decided to hire Kevin, the same investigator, who years earlier had helped him find Sophie. Kevin was discreet, efficient, and loyal. In a few days, Kevin presented his first findings. The suspicious account really existed, but was linked to a false name. The trail led to a modest apartment in a distant neighborhood. Richard wanted to resolve it personally, but Emily insisted that he be cautious. So together, they arranged a meeting with the manager of the bank responsible for the transfers, requesting more information. It was there that they received the first concrete clue. One of the transfers made had been to a familiar name, Anna. Morgan, a distant half-sister of Richard's that he barely remembered existed, the fruit of an extramarital relationship of his father. The shock was immediate. "Do you think she might have some interest in our family?" Emily asked, apprehensive. "I have no idea," Richard replied, tense, "but it seems we have more family ties than we imagined." Determined to discover the truth, Richard and Emily contacted Anna, who agreed to meet them at a discreet restaurant. When they arrived, they were surprised by an elegant woman, but with an expression hardened by time and perhaps grievances. "You finally found me," she said, without beating around the bush. "I imagine you're curious about the transfers." "We just want to understand," Richard replied, trying to maintain calm. Anna sighed. "Lisa and I were friends for years, long before you knew. She sought me out when she got sick. She left not only letters but financial resources, asking that I take care of another child." Emily and Richard remained silent, astonished. "Another child?" Emily repeated, confused. "Yes," Anna continued. "Lisa had a relationship before. You, Richard, and that child, and they're alive. I was responsible for ensuring they had a good life, away from everyone's eyes." The shock was so great that neither could react immediately. "This child is Sophie's sibling," Anna concluded. "Half-brother, actually. And now he wants to meet you." Silence hung dense in the restaurant. Emily and Richard were astonished at the revelation. a half-brother of Sophie's, a son that Lisa had had before and that no one knew existed, until... Now, his name is Gabriel, said Anna, breaking the silence. He's 10 years old. Lisa entrusted his guardianship to me shortly before disappearing. She wanted to protect him, ensure he wouldn't be thrown into the system. Richard ran his hand over his face, trying to process. Why did she never tell me? This? Why hide it? Anna sighed, seeming tired. Lisa had her reasons. She knew you were focused on your career, that you didn't want children at that time. And Gabriel, well, he was the fruit of a complicated relationship, with someone she preferred to forget. Emily looked at Richard, feeling in him the weight of guilt, of surprise. And now? She asked, her voice low. Anna hesitated before answering. Now he wants to meet you, and he wants to meet his sister. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Emily and Richard sat in the living room, the children already sleeping. The revelation hung like a shadow, a storm about to break. I don't know how to deal with this, Richard confessed, looking at his hands. I spent so much time looking for Sophie, fighting to be part of her life. And now I discover there's a son I never knew. Emily placed her hand over his, firm. It's not your fault, Richard. Lisa made choices. What matters now is how we handle this. Richard looked at her, eyes full of uncertainty. And Sophie? How do we tell her she has an older brother she never knew? Emily took a deep breath. Calmly. With truth, as we've always done. It was decided that before talking to Sophie, they would meet Gabriel personally. They couldn't introduce another change in their daughter's life without first understanding who this boy was and what role he would have in their lives. A few days later, in a quiet park in the city, Richard and Emily waited anxiously. Anna approached with Gabriel by her side. The boy was thin, with slightly wavy brown hair and eyes that vaguely resembled Lisa's. He was visibly nervous, his shoulders tense. Gabriel, Anna introduced. These are Richard and Emily. Gabriel looked at them cautiously. Hi, he said, almost in a whisper. Richard crouched down, trying to appear less imposing. Hi, Gabriel. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Emily smiled, trying to convey confidence. Do you like parks? Gabriel shrugged, still withdrawn. I like to draw. I brought my sketchbook. With gentleness, Emily suggested that he show them his drawings. Gradually, the boy began to open up, allowing himself to talk more, sharing that. He liked airplanes and dreamed of being a pilot. When the afternoon ended, Richard looked at Gabriel with tenderness. I'd like to see you again. Maybe you could meet your sister, Sophie. She would love to meet you. The hesitant gleam in the boy's eyes was answer enough. That same night, after putting the twins to bed, Emily and Richard called Sophie for a conversation, in the living room. The girl, now 7 years old, was curious and sensitive. Emily felt her heart tighten at seeing those attentive eyes turn to her. Sweetie, Emily began softly, remember how we've talked about families being made in many different ways? Sophie nodded, playing with a cushion. Well, Richard continued, his voice firm but tender. Today we discovered something important. You have a brother, an older brother. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? I have a brother? Yes, Emily said, stroking her daughter's hair. His name is Gabriel. He's 10 years old and would really like to meet you. Sophie was thoughtful for a few seconds. Does he like toys too? Emily smiled, feeling a wave of relief. He likes to draw airplanes. Sophie broke into a smile. I think I can lend him my little airplane. Emily's heart overflowed. Despite the fears, the uncertainties, her daughter was showing once again that love was stronger than any revelation. In the days that followed the revelation, Emily and Richard organized careful meetings between Sophie and Gabriel. They chose quiet places, parks, cafes with children's areas, so the siblings could get to know each other without pressure. At the first meeting, Gabriel remained reserved, observing everything attentively. Sophie, in contrast, talked non-stop, trying to find something that would interest him. Do you like dinosaurs? I have a book with all of them. Want to see, she would say, trying to draw a smile from her brother. Gabriel gave a half smile, shy, but something in his eyes showed growing curiosity. While the children interacted, Emily observed attentively. She saw in Gabriel the marks of someone who carried the weight of abandonment and silence, but she also perceived in him something familiar, a deep need to belong. At the end of the meeting, as they were saying goodbye, Gabriel looked at Sophie and, almost whispering, said, "Next time. Can I show you my drawings?" Sophie nodded excitedly. "Sure, you can even draw a dinosaur with me." It was a small step, but Emily and Richard knew each bond carefully built would be essential to unite this new family. As positive as the meetings, where Gabriel still carried a lot of distrust, Anna, who had raised him until now, advised Emily one afternoon. "He was rejected too early, Emily," she said, as they had coffee. "As much as you're making space for him, Gabriel fears it will be temporary." Emily felt the weight of these words. She knew better than anyone how much abandonment could leave scars difficult to erase. That night, talking with Richard, she suggested something bold. What if he spent a weekend with us? Something informal, no pressure, to show that the house is his too. Richard hesitated. "Do you think he's ready? Maybe not completely, but we need to show that he has a place here." It was decided. Carefully, they explained the proposal to Gabriel. The boy, initially tense, accepted with a short nod, without much expression. When Friday arrived, with a small backpack on his back, Gabriel entered for the first time the house where his younger siblings played on the carpet, and Sophie was already running to show him her room. It was just a weekend, but for Emily and Richard, it was the beginning of something much bigger. The first weekend was a roller coaster. Gabriel was polite, but clearly distrustful. He avoided calling Emily and Richard by name, answered questions with short phrases, and observed everything from a distance like a visitor. But gradually, small cracks appeared. On Saturday morning, while Emily prepared breakfast, she heard laughter coming from the living room. She peeked through the door and saw Gabriel and Sophie playing a board game, laughing at the faces they made when they lost a round. But not everything was rosy. On Sunday, when Gabriel caught Richard helping Lucas with a toy, he withdrew, clearly troubled. Later, Richard found him in the backyard, drawing alone. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting beside him. Gabriel shrugged. It's strange." "Want to talk about what's strange?" The boy took time to respond, but finally murmured, "I don't know if I have a place here." Richard took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "You do, Gabriel. I know it must seem confusing, but here there's no closed door. The house is yours too, whenever you want." Gabriel didn't respond immediately, but throughout the day Richard noticed a slight relaxation in the boy's posture. The walls were beginning to fall brick by brick. The following week, Gabriel returned to Anna's house, but now the visits became frequent. With each visit to Emily and Richard's house, he left a bit more reservation behind. He began to help Sophie with homework, to participate in dinners without being called, and even started playing with the twins, albeit still with some caution. It was during one of these dinners that Sophie made an unexpected announcement. "There's a school party. Can I say I have 2 brothers now?" Gabriel's look instinctively searched for Emily and Richard. "Of course you can, my love," Emily responded, her voice laden with emotion. Sophie's simple phrase seemed to knock down something definitive. For the first time, Gabriel looked at Richard and said, "Can I stay next weekend too?" Richard smiled, containing his emotion. "You can, Gabriel, whenever you want." Emily knew that the journey would still be long, but at that moment, looking at her family, she felt that everyone was exactly where they should be. The following months were filled with gradual adjustments as Gabriel became more integrated into the family. His weekend visits extended, and there were discussions about him possibly moving in permanently. He had even started calling Emily and Richard by Mom and Dad, though sometimes he would catch himself and switch back to their names. One evening, as Emily was preparing dinner and Richard was helping the twins with a puzzle, she overheard Sophie and Gabriel talking in the living room. "Are you going to live here forever?" Sophie asked, her voice curious but not worried. There was a pause. Before Gabriel answered, "I don't know, would that be okay with you?" "Of course." Sophie's voice was enthusiastic. "You're my brother. Brothers and sisters are supposed to live together." Emily felt her heart swell at Sophie's simple acceptance. Later that night, after all the children were asleep, Emily found Richard sitting on the porch looking at the stars. "I think Gabriel is almost ready," she said softly, sitting beside him. Richard nodded, taking her hand. "I think so too, but we should let him set the pace." Emily leaned her head on Richard's shoulder. "Our family keeps growing in the most unexpected ways." Richard laughed softly. "When I first came looking for Sophie, I never imagined I'd end up with 4 children and the most amazing woman I've ever met." Emily smiled, feeling a deep contentment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family. A few weeks later, Gabriel officially moved in. The transition wasn't without its bumps. There were moments of tension, arguments about space and rules, and occasional bouts of Gabriel's insecurity resurfacing. But with patience, love, and consistent support, these moments became less frequent. One afternoon, while Emily was working in the garden, Gabriel came to help her plant new flowers. "Mum," he said, the word still sounding slightly foreign on his lips, but coming more naturally each time. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," Emily replied, giving him her full attention. Do you think my biological mom would be happy?" "About everything?" Emily felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was the first time Gabriel had initiated a conversation about Lisa. "I believe she would be very happy," Emily said gently. "From everything we know about her, she wanted what was best for you and Sophie. I think seeing you both together, in a home filled with love, would make her very happy indeed." Gabriel nodded, seeming to process this. "I'm glad things worked out this way," he said finally, "even though it was hard sometimes." Emily reached out and squeezed his hand. "Me too, Gabriel. So very glad." As they continued working side by side in the garden, Emily reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all together. From that cold night when she found a tiny baby abandoned in a park, through all the fears, struggles, and moments of joy, to this peaceful afternoon with her son, a son she hadn't given birth to but loved with all her heart. Their family might not look like others, with its complicated past and unusual formation, but it was bound together with something stronger than blood: choice, commitment, and unconditional love. In the years that followed, there would be more challenges, teenage growing pains, questions about identity, the inevitable complications that come with raising 4 children. But the foundation they had built was strong, their love tested and proven resilient. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over their garden, Emily called the rest of the family outside. Sophie came running. The twins toddled after her with Richard close behind. They all sat together on the grass, talking and laughing as the day came to a close. Looking around at the faces of those she loved most in the world, Richard, Sophie, Gabriel, Lucas, Olivia, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had taken them on an unexpected path, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be, together.